Salvatore "Sammy the Bull" Gravano is a former underboss of the Gambino crime family. He is known as the man who helped bring down John Gotti, the family's boss, by agreeing to become a Federal Bureau of Investigation witness. Originally a mobster for the Colombo crime family, and later for the Brooklyn faction of the Gambinos, Gravano participated in the conspiracy to murder Gambino boss Paul Castellano. Gravano played a key role in planning and executing Castellano's murder. Other conspirators included John Gotti, Angelo Ruggiero, Frank DeCicco, and Joseph Armone. After Castellano's death, Gotti elevated Gravano to underboss, a position he held at the time he became a government witness. At the time, Gravano was the highest-ranking member of the 5 families to break his Cosa Nostra oath and cooperate with the government. His testimony drew a wave of Cosa Nostra members to also become government witnesses. Childhood and early life: Salvatore Gravano was born in 1945 to Giolando Jerry and Caterina K. Gravano. He was the youngest of 3 children, and the only boy. The Gravano family lived in Bensonhurst, a largely Italian-American neighborhood in Brooklyn. Early on, one of Gravano's relatives remarked that he looked like his uncle Sammy. From that point on, everyone called Gravano Sammy instead of Salvatore. His father ran a small dress factory and maintained a good standard of living for the family. At age 7 or 8, Gravano started stealing 2 cupcakes every day from a corner store in Bensonhurst on his way to school. After being caught by a store employee, a distraught Gravano received a stern warning. At age 13, Gravano joined the Rampers, a prominent street gang in Bensonhurst. At an early age, Gravano found a few people that had stolen his bicycle and went to fight the thieves. Made men who were watching from a cafe saw him take on a few people at once, and they gave Gravano back his bike. As he was leaving, one of the mafia-made men remarked on how little Sammy fought like a bull, and hence his nickname the Bull. Gravano did poorly in school, possibly due to dyslexia. However, teachers dismissed his problems as being a slow learner. Gravano was held back from grade advancement on 2 occasions. At first, other children taunted him about this, but the taunting ended after Gravano assaulted several bullies. When Gravano reached age 16, the school refused to keep him any longer. Gravano's father tried to redirect and discipline his son, including forcing him to attend Mass, but had little success. In 1964, Gravano was drafted into the United States Army and served in the United States. While an enlisted man, Gravano mainly worked as a mess hall cook. He rose to the rank of corporal and was granted an honorable discharge after 2 years. In 1971, Gravano married Deborah Sibetta. They had 2 children. As of 2012, his daughter Karen Gravano was appearing on the VH1 reality series, Mob Wives. Later in his mob career, Gravano was ordered to help arrange the murder of his brother-in-law, Nicholas Sibetta. Gravano is also the brother-in-law of Gambino capo Edward Garofalo and Mario Garofalo. Gravano was a childhood friend of Colombo crime family associate Gerard Papa. Colombo associate, the mafia had been in Bensonhurst for a long time. Several wise guys hung around a bar that a young Gravano and his father frequently passed. Despite his father's attempts to dissuade him, Gravano, like many of his Rampart colleagues, drifted into the Cosa Nostra. He first became associated with the Cosa Nostra in 1968 through Tommy Spiro, whose uncle Shorty was an associate of the Colombo crime family under future boss, Carmine the Snake Persico. Gravano was initially involved in petty crimes such as larceny, hijacking, and armed robbery. He quickly moved into racketeering, loan sharking, and running a lucrative poker game in the back room of an after-hours club, of which he was part owner. Gravano became a particular favorite of family boss Joe Colombo, who used Gravano to picket the FBI Manhattan headquarters as part of his Italian-American Civil Rights League initiative. Gravano's rise was so precipitous that it was generally understood that he would be among the first to become made when the Cosa Nostra's membership books were reopened. In 1970, Gravano committed his first murder that of Joseph Colucci, a fellow Spiro associate with whose wife Tommy Spiro was having an affair. Colucci reportedly was planning to kill Gravano and both Spiros in retaliation. Gravano described the experience thusly. As that Beatles song played, I became a killer. Joe Colucci was going to die. I was going to kill him because he was plotting to kill me. I felt the rage inside me, everything went in slow motion. I could almost feel the bullet leaving the gun and entering his skull. It was strange. I didn't hear the first shot. I didn't see any blood. His head didn't seem to move. I felt like I was a million miles away, like this was all a dream. The Colucci murder won respect and approval from Persico for Gravano. Gravano later became a mentor to Colucci's son, Jack Colucci, who became involved in the construction industry as a Gambino associate. Made man. In the early 1970s, Colombo mobster Ralph Spiro, brother of Shorty, became envious of Gravano's success, fearing that he would become a made man before his son Tommy. To avoid conflict, Shorty Spiro allowed Gravano to leave the Colombo family and join the Gambino crime family. Now with the Gambinos, Gravano became an associate of capo Salvatore Toto Orello. Orello quickly took a liking to Gravano and became his mob mentor. Around this time, Gravano took a construction job. A former associate, however, falsely claimed to the New York District Attorney's Office that Gravano and another associate were responsible for a double murder from 1969. After Gravano was indicted, he desperately needed money to pay his legal bills. He quit his construction job and went on a self-described robbing rampage for a year and a half. 1 week into the trial, the prosecution moved to dismiss the charges. Gravano later said of this legal problem, "That pinch changed my whole life. I never, ever stopped a second from there on in. I was like a madman. Never stopped stealing. Never stopped robbing. I was obsessed." Gravano's robbery spree impressed Orello, who proposed him for membership in the Gambino family. In 1976, the Cosa Nostra's membership books were finally reopened and Gravano became one of the first to be sworn in. Gambino soldier, family loyalty put to the test. Gravano's loyalty to his dueling families was put to the test in 1978, when the erratic behavior of his brother-in-law, Nicholas Cibetta, attracted the attention of Gambino leadership. Cibetta, the brother of Gravano's wife, had developed an alcohol problem and soon started using cocaine. A series of altercations with mob associates followed, one of which ended with Cibetta having his adversary arrested, earning Cibetta a reputation as a rat. Cibetta sealed his fate when he insulted the daughter of Georgie DeCicco, uncle of Gambino member Frank DeCicco. Hearing the news, Gravano gave his brother-in-law a beating in an attempt to forestall worse punishment. The elder DeCicco, however, was incensed and took the matter to boss Paul Castellano, who ordered a hit on Cibetta. The order was given to Frank DeCicco, who was told not to inform Gravano. DeCicco gave the contract to Luborio Louis Melito and Joseph D'Angelo, S.R., two associates on Gravano's crew. After consultation, the three agreed it was wrong not to tell Gravano. DeCicco went to Castellano and persuaded him to give permission to inform Gravano, but Castellano also authorized DeCicco to kill Gravano if he opposed the murder. According to Gravano, he was initially livid at the news and threatened to kill Castellano, but DeCicco eventually convinced him opposition would be futile and Gravano acquiesced to the murder. The only part of Cibetta's body ever recovered was one of his hands, and he was declared legally dead in 1985. How Cibetta was killed, as well as the exact extent of Gravano's involvement, remains unknown. Around this time, Gravano opened an after-hours club in Bensonhurst. The bar was the scene of a violent altercation one night, involving a rowdy biker gang intent on ransacking the establishment, which may have served as inspiration for a similar scene in the 1993 film A Bronx Tale. A melee ensued, in which Gravano broke his ankle and the bikers were chased off. Gravano then went to Castellano and received permission to murder the leader of the gang. Along with Melito, Gravano hunted down the leader, wounding him and killing another member of the gang. Castellano was flabbergasted when he learned the crutch-ridden Gravano personally took part in the hit. construction magnate. Like his predecessor Carlo Gambino, Castellano favored emphasizing more sophisticated schemes involving construction, trucking, and garbage disposal over traditional street-level activities such as loan sharking, gambling, and hijackings. Castellano had a particular interest in the construction business. Gravano began to change his boss's cowboy image of him when he entered into the plumbing and drywall business with his brother-in-law, Edward Garofalo. As Gravano's involvement in construction increased, he became closer and closer to Castellano, eventually penetrating Castellano's inner circle and becoming a regular at his Tote Hill, Staten Island mansion. Gravano's construction and other business interests soon earned him a reputation as a good earner within the Gambino organization and made him a multi-millionaire, enabling him to build a large estate for his family in rural Ocean County, New Jersey. Flush with cash, Gravano also invested in trotting horses to race at the Meadowlands racetrack in East Rutherford, New Jersey. Gravano also became the operator of a popular discotheque, the Plaza Suite, in the Gravesend section of Brooklyn. Gravano reportedly made $4,000 a week from the Plaza Suite alone. Gravano also used the club as his construction racket headquarters. Simone murder. Gravano further ingratiated himself to Castellano when he interceded in a civil war that had erupted within the Philadelphia crime family. In March 1980, longtime Philadelphia boss, Angelo Bruno, was assassinated by his consigliere, Antonio Caponegro, without authorization from the commission. The commission summoned Caponegro to New York, where it sentenced him to death for his transgression. After Caponegro was tortured and killed, Philip Testa was installed as the new Philadelphia boss and Nicky Scarfa was consigliere. The commission subsequently placed contracts on Caponegro's co-conspirators, including John "Johnny" Key Simone, who also happened to be Bruno's cousin. The Simone contract was given to Gravano. After befriending Simone through a series of meetings, Gravano, with the assistance of Milito and Angelo, abducted Simone from Yardley Golf Club in Yardley, Pennsylvania and drove him to a wooded area on Staten Island. Gravano then granted Simone's requests to die with his shoes off, in fulfillment of a promise he had made to his wife, and at the hands of a made man. After Gravano removed Simone's shoes, Milito shot Simone in the back of the head, killing him. Gravano later expressed admiration for Simone as a so-called man's man, remarking favorably on the calmness with which he accepted his fate. Gravano earned praise from Castellano for the killing. Fiala murder. By the early 1980s, the Plaza Suite was a thriving establishment. Patrons often had to wait an hour to get in, and the club featured high-profile live acts such as singers Chubby Checker and the Four Tops. In 1982, Frank Fiala, a wealthy businessman and drug trafficker, paid Gravano $40,000 to rent the Plaza Suite for a birthday party he was throwing himself. 2 days after the party, Gravano accepted a $1 million offer from Fiala to buy the establishment, which Gravano had only valued at $200,000. The deal was structured to include $100,000 cash as a down payment, $650,000 in gold bullion under the table, and a $250,000 payment at the real estate closing. Before the transaction was completed, Fiala began acting like he already owned the club. He started remodeling it and hired his own bouncers. The final provocation was when Fiala moved into Gravano's private office and began breaking through an office wall. Gravano, enraged, stormed into the office followed by Garofalo. Fiala was standing behind Gravano's desk. He sat down in Gravano's chair, smirking at the two men. "What do you think you're doing?" Gravano growled. "This doesn't belong to you till the closing. Get the hell out of here." Fiala reached into a desk drawer, removed an Uzi machine pistol and aimed it at the two men. Ordering them to sit down, Fiala stated, "You fucking greaseballs, you do things my way." Upon leaving the Plaza Suite, Gravano called Garofalo and set up an ambush outside the club, involving Garofalo, Milito, D'Angelo, Nicholas Mormando, and Michael DeBat in the plan. Later that night, Gravano confronted Fiala on the street as he exited the Plaza Suite among a group of people, asking, "Hey, Frank, how you doing?" As Fiala turned around, surprised to see Gravano, Milito came up behind him and shot him in the head. Milito stood over the body and fired a shot into each of Fiala's eyes as Fiala's entourage and the crowd of people on the street dispersed, screaming. Gravano then walked up to Fiala's corpse and spat on it. Although Gravano believed the entire neighborhood knew he was responsible for the murder, he was never charged for the crime. Gravano had made a $5,000 payoff to the lead New York Police Department homicide detective Louis Ippolito to ensure that the investigation yielded no leads. Although Gravano evaded criminal charges, he incurred Castellano's wrath over the unsanctioned killing. Gravano attempted to lie low for nearly 3 weeks afterwards, during which time he called his crew together and made the decision to kill Castellano if necessary. Gravano and Milito were then summoned to a meeting with Castellano at a Manhattan restaurant. Castellano had been given the details of what Fiala had done, but he was still livid that Gravano had not come to him for permission to kill Fiala first. Gravano, however, was spared execution when he convinced Castellano that the reason he had kept him in the dark was to protect the boss in case something went wrong with the hit. Fiala's murder posed one final problem for Gravano in the form of the Internal Revenue Service. The high publicity generated by the incident triggered an IRS investigation into Gravano and Fiala's deal for the sale of the Plaza Suite, and Gravano was subsequently charged with tax evasion. Gravano was represented by Gerald Sharjul and acquitted at trial. Gravano's relief at being acquitted was tempered by the news close friend, D'Angelo, had been killed by a Colombo family associate celebrating his having been proposed for membership. The killer was then murdered, himself, on orders from the Colombo family. Aligning with Gotti, in the aftermath of the Fiala murder, Gravano continued to focus on his construction business, branching out into the lucrative concrete paving industry. New York City's cement industry was controlled by 4 of the 5 families, which made millions of dollars by manipulating bids and steering contracts. Gravano eventually became embroiled in a dispute with business partner Louis Di Bono, a member of another Gambino crew. A sit-down with Castellano was held, at which an irate Gravano accused Di Bono of withholding $200,000 in payments for subcontracts and threatened to kill Di Bono. Gambino underboss Neil Delacroix intervened on Gravano's behalf and Castellano told the 2 men to end their business partnership, though Gravano's standing with the boss slipped as a result of the incident. Delacroix, however, was rising star John Gotti's mentor, and when word got back to him that Delacroix had supported Gravano, Gotti was impressed. During this time, the FBI had intensified its efforts against the Gambino family, and in August 1983, 3 members of Gotti's crew Angelo Ruggiero, John Caneglia, and Jean Gotti were indicted for heroin trafficking. Castellano was against anyone in the family dealing narcotics. Castellano planned to kill Jean Gotti and Ruggiero if he believed they were drug traffickers. Castellano asked Ruggiero for a copy of the government surveillance tapes that had Ruggiero's conversations. To save Jean Gotti and Ruggiero, Delacroix stalled the demand. Eventually, one of the reasons for Gotti's killing Castellano was to save his brother and Ruggiero. The FBI had bugged Ruggiero's house and telephone, and Castellano decided he needed copies of the tapes to justify his impending move to Delacroix and the family's other capos. When Castellano was indicted for both his connection to Roy DeMeo's stolen car ring and as part of the Mafia Commission trial, he learned his own house had been bugged on the basis of evidence from the Ruggiero tapes and he became livid. In June 1985, he again demanded that Delacroix get him the tapes. Both Delacroix and Gotti tried to convince Ruggiero to comply if Castellano explained beforehand how he intended to use the tapes, but Ruggiero refused, fearing he would endanger good friends. 3 months later, Gravano was approached by Robert DiBernardo, a fellow Gambino member acting as an intermediary for Gotti. DiBernardo informed him that Gotti and Ruggiero wanted to meet with him in Queens. Gravano arrived to find only Ruggiero was present. Ruggiero informed Gravano that he and Gotti were planning to murder Castellano and asked for Gravano's support. Gravano was initially non-committal, wanting to confer first with Frank DeCicco. In conversation with DeCicco, both men voiced concern that Castellano would designate his nephew, Thomas Gambino, acting boss, and his driver, Thomas Bilotti, underboss, in the event he was convicted and sent to prison. Neither man appealed to Gravano or DeCicco as leadership material, and they ultimately decided to support the hit on Castellano. Castellano murder. Gravano's second choice to become boss after Castellano's murder was Frank DeCicco, but DeCicco felt John Gotti's ego was too big to take a subservient role. DeCicco argued that Gotti's boldness, intelligence, and charisma made him well suited to be a good boss, and he convinced Gravano to give Gotti a chance. DeCicco and Gravano, however, also made a secret pact to kill Gotti and take over the family as boss and underboss, respectively, if they were unhappy with Gotti's leadership after 1 year. The conspirators' first order of business was meeting with other Gambino members, most of whom were disaffected under Castellano, and gaining their support for the hit. Gotti and Ruggiero then sought and obtained the approval of the Colombo and Bonanno families, while DeCicco secured the backing of the Luccheses. The conspirators decided not to approach the Genovese family due to boss Vincent the Chin Gigante's long-standing friendship with Castellano. With Neil Delacroce's death on December 2, the final constraint on a move by Gotti or Castellano against the other was removed. Gotti, enraged that Castellano chose not to attend his mentor's wake, wasted little time in striking. Not suspecting the plot against him, Castellano invited DeCicco to a meeting on December 16, 1985 with fellow capos Thomas Gambino, James Failer, and Danny Marino at Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan. The conspirators considered the restaurant a prime location for the hit because the area would be packed with bustling crowds of holiday shoppers, making it easier for the assassins to blend in and escape. The plans for the assassination were finalized on December 15, and the next afternoon, the conspirators met for a final time on the Lower East Side. At Gotti's suggestion, the shooters wore long white trench coats and black fur Russian hats, which Gravano considered a brilliant idea. Gotti and Gravano arrived at the restaurant shortly before 5 o'clock and, after circling the block, parked their car across the intersection and within view of the entrance. Around 5:30, Gravano spotted Castellano's Lincoln Town car stopped at a nearby intersection and, via walkie-talkie, alerted the team of hitmen stationed outside the restaurant of Castellano's approach. Castellano's driver, Thomas Bilotti, pulled the car up directly in front of the entrance. As Castellano and Bilotti exited the Lincoln, the roughly half-dozen shooters moved in and opened fire, killing both men in a barrage of bullets. As the hat and trenchcoat-adorned men slipped away into the night, Gotti calmly drove the car past the front of the restaurant to get a look at the scene. Looking down at Bilotti's body from the passenger window, Gravano remarked, "He's gone." Co-underboss and consigliere, the new regime. After Castellano's death, a meeting of the Gambino family's capos was held, at which Frank DeCicco nominated Gotti to be the new boss. Gotti's nomination met with no opposition and he was installed as Don. Gotti, in turn, selected DeCicco as his underboss and elevated Gravano to capo after Toto Orello announced his desire to step down. Gotti was recognized as the Gambino family's boss and a member of the commission by each of the other 5 families, including the Genovese family, whose approval for the hit on Castellano had been deliberately bypassed by Gotti and his co-conspirators. The Genovese family, however, was still upset that Gotti had proceeded without the full sanctioning of the commission and cryptically announced that a mafia rule had been broken, for which somebody would have to pay if and when the commission, which was in disarray at the time due to the Mafia Commission trial, met again. Gravano and DeCicco had been hiding out in safe houses, but they took the other family's full recognition of Gotti as an indication that it was safe to resurface. The Genoveses made good on their veiled threat in April 1986, when DeCicco was killed by a car bomb outside of Castellano's former social club in Bensonhurst, then operated by Gambino capo James Failer. Gravano was at the club at the time and was blown off his feet by the blast. Gravano attempted to pull DeCicco from the wreckage but realized it was no use when he saw various body parts scattered about. The attack was orchestrated by Genovese boss Vincent Gigante, with the backing of Lucky's leaders Vittorio Vicamaso and Anthony Caspicasso. The bomb was intended to kill both DeCicco and Gotti, who was supposed to be at the club for a meeting with Gravano and DeCicco. Gotti, however, couldn't make the meeting and rescheduled for later that evening at the Ravenite Social Club in Manhattan. Fela and fellow capo Daniel Marino were two of Castellano's closest associates before his death, and both men were in on Gigante's plot. In exchange for a promise to be designated co-leaders of the Gambino family after the assassinations, Fela and Marino provided intelligence and tipped off the plotters to the planned meeting in Bensonhurst. The plotters reportedly used a car bomb for the attack in order to divert suspicion. The method had its intended effect, as Gotti and Gravano considered and dismissed the possibility that Gigante was behind the plot, reasoning, he wouldn't use bombs. With DeCicco dead, the Gambinos were left without an underboss. Gotti chose to fill the vacancy by naming Angelo Ruggiero and Gravano co-underbosses. Nicky Cowboy murder. The first person on Gravano's hit list after Castellano's murder was Nicholas Nicky Cowboy Mormando, a former member of his crew. Mormando had become addicted to crack cocaine and was suspected by Gravano of getting friend and fellow crew member Michael DeBat addicted to the drug. According to Gravano, Mormando started to act like a renegade. Berserk. The final straw came when Mormando announced he no longer wanted to be in the crew and planned to start his own gang. Gravano decided he couldn't take a chance, because Mormando knew too much, and he got permission from Gotti to kill Mormando. Gravano arranged to have Mormando murdered on his way to a meeting at Gravano's Bensonhurst restaurant, Tali's. After assuring Mormando of his safety, Gravano told him to pick up Joseph Parata on his way. Parata got in the back seat of the car and shot Mormando twice in the back of the head. Mormando's corpse was then disposed of in a vacant lot, where it was discovered the next day. Consigliere. Gotti was imprisoned in May 1986 at the Metropolitan Correctional Center, New York while awaiting trial on Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act charges. He was forced to rely heavily on Gravano, Angelo Ruggiero, and Joseph Armone to manage the family's day-to-day affairs while he called the major shots from his jail cell. In June, Gravano was approached by Ruggiero and, supposedly at Gotti's behest, given orders to murder capo Robert DiBernardo for making negative remarks about Gotti's leadership. Gravano was friendly with DiBernardo and tried to get the murder called off until he had a chance to speak with Gotti after his trial. Ruggiero claimed to have met again with Gotti and told Gravano that the boss wanted DiBernardo killed right away. Gravano arranged a meeting with DiBernardo where Joe Parata, a member of Gravano's crew, shot DiBernardo twice in the back of the head as the underboss watched. Gravano later learned that Ruggiero was $250,000 in debt to DiBernardo and realized Ruggiero may have fabricated the orders from Gotti or simply lied to Gotti about what DiBernardo was accused of saying in order to erase the debt and improve his own standing in the family. In any event, DiBernardo's death proved profitable for Gravano, as he took over the deceased man's control of Teamsters Local 282. Gotti's trial ultimately ended in a mistrial due to a hung jury and the boss was freed from jail. Gravano's specific position within the family varied during 1986 and 1987. He started out as co-underboss with Ruggiero and later was shifted to co-consigliere with Armone. When Joseph Gallo and Armone were convicted on racketeering charges in 1987, Gotti turned to Gravano to help fill the void, promoting him to official consigliere and making Frank Locascio acting underboss. By this time, Gravano was regarded as a rising force in the construction industry and often mingled with executives from major construction firms and union officials at his popular Bensonhurst restaurant, Tali's. Gravano's success was not without a downside. First, his quick rise up the Gambino hierarchy attracted the attention of the FBI, and he was soon placed under surveillance. Second, he started to sense some jealousy from Gotti over the profitability of his legitimate business interests. Nevertheless, Gravano claimed to be kicking up over $2 a million each year to Gotti out of his union activities alone. More murders. Michael DeBat, the son of a late friend of Gravano's, had also become addicted to crack cocaine. DeBat's wife came to Gravano pleading for help. She told Gravano that DeBat stayed up at night with a gun claiming they were coming to get him. Gravano had taken DeBat under his wing after the elder DeBat's death, as he had done with Joey D'Angelo. Gravano responded to DeBat's wife's cries for help by having DeBat shot to death at Tali's, Gravano's bar. The shooters emptied the cash register and left DeBat in the bar to make it look like a robbery. Not long after this, Gravano became the family's consigliere and his old crew was taken over by Louis Big Lou Valerio. Louis Milito, Gravano's old buddy from his childhood days with the Rampers, was not pleased with this decision. Milito made the mistake of telling other crew members that it was he who should have been given the top spot in Gravano's crew after Gravano's promotion, and not Valerio. Gravano claimed in his book Underboss that before the Castellano hit, Milito had become much closer to Castellano and Bilotti. Castellano had informed Milito that Gravano should have been killed after the unsanctioned murder of Frank Fiala as well as after Gravano threatened fellow made man Louis Di Bono. With John Gotti and the Bergin crew in hot water with the indictment of Angelo Ruggiero on heroin distribution charges, Milito feared Gravano and his crew could be in danger of being killed along with Gotti, once Neil Delacroix died. Milito, according to Gravano, severed business ties with Gravano and started a loans hark operation with Tommy Bilotti. When Castellano and Bilotti were murdered, Milito was in prison. Upon his release, Gravano claims Gotti wanted Milito killed. Gravano claims he stood up for Milito and stopped the murder from happening. After he was read the riot act, Milito returned to Gravano's crew, only to badmouth his old friend's choice of Valerio as captain after Gravano's promotion. Milito was called to a meeting to discuss the murder of a Gambino associate. Gene Gotti, John Carneglia, Louis Valerio and Arnold Squitieri were present at the meeting, as was Gravano. While Milito was drinking some espresso, Carneglia shot him to death. Milito's body has never been found. Milito's wife Linda claims in her book Mafia Wife that when Louis Milito did not come home or call, she went to see Gravano at his home. Linda said Gravano gave her $5,000 and cut all ties to her. Linda also wrote that a friend saw Gravano driving Louis Milito's Lincoln and was able to identify it by damage done to the car before Louis Milito went missing. Linda Milito would cry foul in her book after Gravano testified he had not been the shooter in Louis Milito's murder. She said that a Gambino family member later informed her Gravano had shot and killed Louis Milito, contrary to what Gravano had told the FBI. Gravano, however, claims in his book Underboss that after Milito was killed, he finished the construction work Milito was having done on his home and continued to support Linda Milito and her family. Despite Gravano's rise in status to consigliere, Gotti continued to use Gravano for the task of murder. In May 1988, Gravano and Robert Bisexia, a New Jersey crime family soldier, murdered Francesco Oliveri for beating a Gambino family crew member to death. Bisexia shot Oliveri to death while Gravano waited in a stolen getaway car. After Oliveri, John Gotti had finally got around to taking care of Wilfred Willie Boy Johnson. Johnson had been a childhood friend of Gotti's and a longtime crew member while Gotti was captain of the Bergin crew. However, at Gotti's RICO trial, Diane Giacalone, the head prosecutor, revealed that Johnson had been an informant for the FBI for years. Johnson refused to testify for the prosecution. In Underboss, Gravano claims that Gotti met with Johnson during the trial and informed Johnson that as long as he never testified against Gotti, he and his family would not be harmed. Johnson would never be allowed to participate in mob matters again, however. Johnson asked Gotti to swear on his dead son, Frank Gotti, who had been killed in an accident years ago. Gotti swore. Now Gotti was having second thoughts. John discussed how it should go, using me to bounce off ideas about the best way to do it. That was my only involvement, Gravano explained. Johnson was shot while walking to his car to go to work in front of his house in May 1988. In 1990, Gravano was involved in two murders, the first of which was Eddie Garofalo, a demolition contractor who made the mistake of running afoul of the Gambinos. On August 9, 1990, Garofalo was shot to death in front of his home as arranged by Gravano. The last murder to involve Gravano was the murder of Louis Di Bono, the made man Gravano had threatened to kill earlier. Gravano described the reasons for the murder in Underboss. He was still robbing the family and I asked for permission to take him out. But John had a meeting with Di Bono, and Di Bono told John that he had $1 billion of drywall work that was coming out of the World Trade Center. John bit, hook, line and sinker, and refused my request. John said he would handle Di Bono personally and become his partner. But Di Bono was up to his old tricks, double-dealing. He had obviously been bullshitting John. So when John called Louis in for meetings to discuss their new partnership, Di Bono didn't show up. John was humiliated. This meant an automatic death penalty. John gave the contract to Di Bono's captain, Pat Conti. Conti botched an ideal opportunity to kill Di Bono. Then, as Gotti grew increasingly impatient, Conti explained that the problem now was trying to corner Di Bono again. Whenever a meeting with him was arranged, Di Bono never appeared. It was a joke, what was going on? I couldn't help laughing to myself. I told John, why didn't Pat simplify everything? Just call Louis up and tell him to hang himself. 10 months went by. John looks like an asshole. He was too embarrassed even to ask me for help. A construction associate of Gravano's unknowingly informed Gravano of Di Bono's activities. Gravano informed Gotti and Di Bono's body was found in his car in the parking lot of the World Trade Center in October 1990. Gravano's intentions for this murder would be called into question as it was suspected Gravano might have had different reasons for wanting Di Bono dead due to his jealousy over Di Bono's drywall business. With Gotti's permission, Gravano set up the murders of Tommy Sparrow and several other Gambino associates. Eventually, Gotti would name Gravano his underboss, and move Lo Cascio to consigliere. When Gotti was tried for racketeering and assault charges in the winter of 1986-87, Gravano paid a juror to vote not guilty regardless of the evidence. It was this trial that allowed Gotti to make his reputation as the Teflon Don. Turning government witness, eventually, Gravano and several other members of the Gambino family became disenchanted with Gotti's lust for the media and high-profile antics, feeling they brought too much heat. Several members of the family informed Gravano that Gotti's high-profile and large gatherings of mob members at the Ravenite Social Club were constant targets for the FBI and that the media attention put a large spotlight on the Gambinos. Many members of the family, according to Gravano, complained to him about Gotti's use of Gravano and murders despite Gravano's position as underboss of the family. Members were also concerned about Gotti's frequent appearances in court. He was first tried for assaulting a refrigerator repairman over a parking space. Through witness intimidation, he was acquitted. Gravano had paid a juror in Gotti's second trial to vote in favor of an acquittal, allowing Gotti to beat the RICO charges lodged against him. Gotti's third trial on state assault charges ended the same way. Gotti's ego began to bother Gravano as well as several other members of the family. Gotti was first known as the Dapper Don in the press for his Brioni suits and hand-painted ties as well as his well-combed hair and quick wit with reporters. Gotti required Gravano and Gambino consigliere Frank Lo Cascio to be at the Ravenite Social Club 5 days a week and all of his captains to make an appearance once a week. When Gravano warned Gotti about the negative attention from reporters as well as the constant surveillance from the FBI, Gotti instructed Gravano not to worry about it as Gotti knew what he was doing. After being acquitted of the shooting of Union official John O'Connor, Gotti received word from a mole that indictments were coming down for Gotti, Gravano, Lo Cascio, and Captain Thomas Gambino. Gotti ordered Gravano to become a fugitive to avoid arrest so that if Gotti was arrested, Gravano could run the family while on the run himself. Gravano hid out in various places on the East Coast for 2 weeks before being ordered to return for a meeting at the Ravenite Social Club in Little Italy. On the night of the meeting, Gotti, Gravano, and Lo Cascio were arrested by the FBI. In court proceedings, Gravano heard FBI tapes of conversations in which Gotti disparaged him for being too greedy and creating a family within a family. Gotti also discussed several murders in which Gravano was involved and worded it to sound like Gravano was a greedy mad dog killer. Gotti was heard on tapes questioning why everyone who went partners with Gravano kept winding up dead, with Gravano always having an excuse why they needed to be killed. Gravano also would make money every time a partner was killed. He was also angered that Gotti was openly rooting for Iraq in the Persian Gulf War. As a veteran, he found this extremely unpatriotic. Gravano had been consulting a hypnotist named Halpin to deal with fears he had, and Gotti's lawyers wanted to call Halpin as a witness, but the judge refused. Gravano had told Halpin he was deathly afraid of going to prison. Gotti informed Gravano he would not be allowed to converse with his lawyers unless Gotti was present. Gravano claimed Gotti's defense to consist of Gotti's lawyers portraying Gotti as a peace-loving boss falling all over himself to restrain the kill-crazy Gravano, resulting in a conviction for Gravano and an acquittal for Gotti. On November 11, 1991, federal prosecutors announced that Gravano became a cooperating government witness. Gravano would later testify against Gotti and other high-ranking mobsters in exchange for a reduced sentence. John Gotti received a sentence of life imprisonment. As part of Gravano's cooperation agreement, he would never be forced to testify against his former crew. On September 26, 1994, a federal judge sentenced Gravano to 5 years in prison. However, since Gravano had already served 4 years, the sentence amounted to less than 1 year. Later life, book and interviews. In 1994, Gravano was released early and entered the U.S. Federal Witness Protection Program. The government moved him to Tempe, Arizona, where he assumed the name Jimmy Moran and started a swimming pool installation company. However, in 1995 Gravano and his family left witness protection and relocated to Scottsdale, Arizona. A federal prosecutor later said that Gravano did not like the constraints of the program. Gravano began living very openly, giving interviews to magazines and appearing in a nationally televised interview with television journalist Diane Sawyer. He appeared on live TV after having had plastic surgery to hide his appearance from the mob. In one interview with author-journalist Howard Bloom, Gravano boasted, "They send a hit team down, I'll kill them. They better not miss, because even if they get me, there will still be a lot of body bags going back to New York. I'm not afraid. I don't have it in me. I'm too detached maybe. If it happens, fuck it. A bullet in the head is pretty quick. You go like that. It's better than cancer. I'm not meeting you in Montana on some fucking farm. I'm not sitting here like some jerk-off with a phony beard. I'll tell you something else, I'm a fucking pro. If someone comes to my house, I got a few little surprises for them. Even if they win, there might be surprises." In 1997, Gravano wrote a book called Underboss with author Peter Mars. In it, Gravano claimed that he became a government witness after Gotti attempted to defame him at their trial. Gravano finally realized that the Cosa Nostra Code of Honor was a sham. At this time, Gravano also hired a publicist, despite the fact Gravano complained often about the publicity-seeking Gotti. After the publication of Underboss, several families of Gravano's victims filed a $25 million lawsuit against him. Also in 1997, New York State took legal action to seize Gravano's profits from the book. During an interview Gravano had with the newspaper The Arizona Republic, he claimed federal agents he had met after becoming a government witness had become his personal friends and even visited him in Arizona while on vacation. Gravano later claimed that he didn't want the Republic to publish the story, but relented after the paper allegedly threatened to reveal that his family was living with him in Phoenix. The story so incensed his former mob compatriots that they forced the Gambinos to put a murder contract on him. Drug conviction. By the late 1990s, Gravano had re-engaged in criminal activity. He partnered with a local youth gang known as the Devil Dogs after his son Gerard became friends with the gang's 23-year-old leader, Michael Pupper. Gravano started a major ecstasy trafficking organization, selling over 30,000 tablets and grossing $500,000 a week. In February 2000, Gravano and 47 other ring members including his wife Deborah, daughter Karen, and Gerard were arrested on federal and state drug charges. Gravano was brought down by informants in his own ring, as well as recorded conversations in which he discussed drug profits with Deborah and Karina, the same evidence that sent Gotti to prison 8 years earlier. On May 25, 2001, Gravano pleaded guilty in New York to federal drug trafficking charges. On June 29, 2001, he pleaded guilty in Phoenix to the state charges. On September 7, 2002, after numerous delays, Gravano was sentenced in New York to 20 years on the federal charges, to run concurrently with a 19-year Arizona sentence. Gerard received 9 years in prison. Deborah and Karen also pleaded guilty and received several years on probation. In 2013, National Geographic Channel dramatized Gravano's ecstasy ring in a scene in the Banged Up Abroad episode Raving Arizona, televised worldwide. The episode told the story of ecstasy dealer English Sean Atwood, who was Gravano's main competitor in the Arizona ecstasy market. Later accusations. On February 24, 2003, New Jersey state prosecutors announced they would indict Gravano for ordering the 1980 murder of NYPD detective Peter Calabro by contract killer Richard Kuklinski. Prosecutors later dropped the charges when Kuklinski, the star witness, died before he could testify. Federal inmates who served time with Gravano claim that he privately admitted to a role in the 1980 killing of a New York cop. Inmates also claimed that Gravano bragged about killing many more than 19 people. Linda Melito claimed in her book Mafia Wife she had heard Gravano had smothered an elderly woman to death during a botched robbery. Melito also claimed that Gravano's former crew members told her that Gravano had shot her husband Louis Melito twice in the back of the head and once under the chin. In his court testimony, Gravano had claimed to be a bystander when Melito was shot. John Gotti's lawyers also accused Gravano of being involved in 2 other murders that were not disclosed by the FBI, but these charges were never proven. If it is ever proven that Gravano lied about how many people he killed, appeals by people he helped put in prison could follow. Since Gravano's imprisonment on drug charges, he has been diagnosed with Graves' disease, a thyroid disorder which can cause fatigue, weight loss with increased appetite, and hair loss. Gravano appeared at his drug trial missing hair on his head and eyebrows and appeared to have lost weight. In Philip Carlo's book Confessions of a Mafia Boss, mobster Anthony Casso, also imprisoned at Florence, claims that Gravano only ventures out of his cell to get food and that Casso has only seen him in the mess hall a couple of times. As of May 2012, Gravano is in an Arizona prison. He will not be eligible for release until 2019, and will be on supervised release for the rest of his life. References. External links: Sammy the Bull Gravano biography, CremellaBerry.com, Salvatore Gravano Arizona inmate information, Booknotes interview with Peter Mars on Underboss, Sammy the Bull Gravano's story of life in the Mafia, August 24, 1997. Sammy Gravano arrest,